Hey everybody, it's Andrew Flushy here. I appreciate everybody coming by to join us for this live stream where we're going to talk about a really important question about how long a traffic stop can last. I hope my new setup here works good for a live stream. I think the lighting looks pretty decent and hopefully the audio is working. If folks can't hear me, please let me know. It looks like some people are joining us, so surely if you couldn't hear me, I'd see some comments by now. Hopefully the audio works good and everything works out good. There's a little delay in what I'm saying and versus what I'm seeing on the camera on my screen. So I'm going to try to get over that. It's kind of mind bending. So today's topic is about how long a traffic stop can be. Okay. And really, it's the same applies to any police detention. How long can a detention in general be? Let's clarify what we mean by a police detention. We're talking clearly that it's not an arrest. A detention is just a brief investigation. Police have reasonable articulable suspicion that committed some crime or traffic infraction. Criminal activity is what very broad definition. It's a very broad concept, and that is a really weird comment. I don't understand what we're doing here. Pardon me, guys. Very weird. Okay, anyway, so a detention is a very brief investigation technique that the police can use. It's essentially a Terry stop, is what the law refers to it as, from Ohio versus Terry, Supreme Court case. And that's what's going on. I'm being told my connection is bad. Huh. Well, that's not good. Are we getting some lag or something, folks? It might be my laptop. My laptop might be running slow. You know what, guys? I am unplugged, and I'll bet my laptop is. Huh. Give me 1 second to get my plug, and I'll bet my laptop's not working happy. So if you guys can give me just 1 second, I will run and grab it, and I will be right back. Apologize for the interruption, but let me go grab my charging cord, and I should be able to plug it in right here where I'm sitting. So I'll be back in about 20 seconds. I don't know if it's going to help us or not. Let me also close a couple things that might be running here. See if maybe we can fix the lag situation. You know, it reminds me of I don't know if it's any better. Let me know if we're doing any better. Reminds me of the quote from Jurassic Park, you know, and they're having issues, and John Hammond says when they opened Disney World, you know, none of the rides worked. That's kind of what happens when you change your setup here. Um, can people let me know if it's any better? I certainly want to produce a good stream so we can have a good conversation here. My connection's showing I'm connected great. I got my laptop on best performance. Good bet. Okay, maybe we just had too much stuff running in the background. Usually I restart my laptop before these, and I didn't do that today. So hopefully it's better. Okay, we're going to take a sip of coffee, and we're going to get started again. Thanks for your patience, folks. Okay, so the what a, basically a stop is it's a brief investigative detention. So a traffic stop is just you're driving a car and the police decide to stop you for a brief investigative detention in your car. And I agree, Jonathan, coffee is the cure. Espresso is my coffee of choice. So anyway, how long can the police detain you? That's the real question. How long can that detention be? And that's what we're going to talk about today. The law is pretty simple in this regard. The police, when they pull you over in your vehicle, they can do several things pursuant to that traffic stop. So let's assume they do have a good stop called reasonable articulable suspicion. They've got a good reason to stop you. And then the question is, what are they doing in the course of that stop? Well, what can they do? They can check your license and your registration and your insurance to make sure that you're a properly licensed driver. They can certainly check to see if you have any outstanding warrants, so they can run your name to see if you're wanted or a fugitive or anything. And then they can certainly investigate the reason that they pulled you over. So let's say it's for speeding. They can, certainly ask you about your speed. Are you in any hurry? Did you see the speed limit sign? Things like that. They can talk to you about speeding issues, but they can't just go into some tangent. That's the issue. Can they go into a tangent, and how long do they have to hold you there on the side of the road? So during an actual traffic stop, they can just do those few things. So they can check your license, your registration, your paperwork. They can check you for warrants, and they can investigate why they actually pulled you over in the first place. That's the key. Those are the things they can do. So then in Virginia, this used to be an issue. Virginia has gone quite liberal with marijuana, but used to we had lots of stops where people were basically being pulled over for traffic violations, and they were being profiled essentially. Cars or individuals where the police thought it seemed like this person might be using marijuana, and the police would find ways to delay, or they would simply call the canine unit, the dog, out, and they would wait around until the dog got there. And so there's lots of case law and issues about, in that context, how long can the police hold you waiting on the dog to come out, essentially. The big case that I want to talk about today is one that if you're interested in this stuff, you might want to familiarize yourself with. Let me share my screen so I can show it to you. The big case is Rodriguez versus United States. It's a Supreme Court case, and I'm trying to blow it up here so it's nice and readable for you if you're interested. So it's Rodriguez versus United States. This is the big case that basically for Virginia especially, blew away what our rule used to be for how long a traffic stop can be. And it set a standard across the country. Um, Basically, what the Virginia rule used to say is that the police can bring you out, they can do a detention, and they can do their traffic stop stuff. And they can do unrelated things as long as it's only a de minimis extension of the traffic stop. So Virginia law used to, pre-Rodriguez, it used to say that the police could extend the stop. It could delay you longer as long as it was a minor delay. And so courts, there's lots of cases in Virginia that talk about what a minor delay is. What are we actually going to call minor versus major, essentially? Well, Rodriguez in 2015, it blew that out of the water. Rodriguez was a huge game changer for Virginia defense attorneys because it changed from the de minimis rule, which is what we used to use, which was very Commonwealth friendly, very anti-defendant. It changed to the new rule across the country, which is Rodriguez in 2015. And the Rodriguez rule is simply, I got a couple passages highlighted for you. Pardon the scrolling here. Here's the Rodriguez rule. Essentially, there's a couple better quotes, but here's a couple quick quotes. The Fourth Amendment may tolerate certain unrelated investigations that do not lengthen the roadside detention. So under the Rodriguez rule, the officer cannot lengthen the detention by doing unrelated things. And there's a quote from another case, a traffic stop, quote, becomes unlawful if it is prolonged beyond the time reasonably required to complete the mission of issuing a warning ticket. I think that's kind of a typo. It really should say a warning or a ticket. And it goes on to say, beyond determining whether to issue a traffic ticket, an officer's mission during a stop typically includes checking the driver's license, determining whether there are outstanding warrants, and inspecting the automobile's registration and proof of insurance. So that's the key kind of heart of a traffic stop, is they can do those things. And if they vary from those things and start doing other things, then the traffic stop becomes illegal. It becomes a violation of your Fourth Amendment right against unreasonable searches and seizures. So that's what we're all talking about here, is what is the exact scope of the Fourth Amendment in the context of a traffic stop. And so that's the issue. So Rodriguez was a huge game changer for Virginia practice, and probably other states. I don't know every state's law before Rodriguez. That's 50 states. That's a lot to research, but I'm sure other states probably had similar rules to Virginia, and maybe some states had even bigger, even more state-friendly rules and less defense-friendly. And so Rodriguez says essentially they cannot extend the stop in any measurable way. What's important about Rodriguez from a just layperson's perspective is the police didn't do anything that was super extensive. The time in Rodriguez, how much they actually extended the stop was about, if I recall, about 7 or 8 minutes. So it's not like they held this guy on the side of the road for half an hour. Or even 20 minutes. It was like 7 or 8 minutes waiting for the canine to arrive. So even a short delay could be fatal to their case. This is one reason I'd hate to beat the drum, but you need to have a dash camera in your car. If you're ever stopped, you could also just start your cell phone recording. And even if all you have was an audio recording going, just set your phone in the seat, maybe have an audio recorder going. You've at least got an audio recording and a timeline of what happened. If the police don't have cameras, it would be really handy for you to have that timeline. So that's kind of the basic nuts of what I want to talk about. Let's talk about a couple questions that we have. Let me remove this from the screen. So we have some great questions that already come in. I'm going to try to answer a lot of questions. If you have other questions on this topic, please hit them in the chat box or the comments. And if you have other questions on other topics, we'll try to get to those towards the end. But I want to try to focus a little bit on this for people that are interested. Animaloo 812 says 15 minutes is how long the police can detain you. The Rodriguez case specifically says there's no set time. So basically, we're not going to reward efficient officers who can do their speeding stop and be done with that quickly. And now they've got 10 more minutes to do whatever the heck they want. And conversely, if the speeding stop itself takes a long time for some reason, let's say maybe the dispatch is having trouble running your license and we can't confirm that your license is valid, and they're kind of going back and forth to figure out who you are or something. Well, a speeding stop could take longer than 15 minutes. So there's no set time frame. The courts have always been very reluctant to actually give set time frames, which is good and bad. I think that the rule that we have now is actually pretty friendly to the citizens and the defense, and that basically the officer has to be diligently pursuing the traffic stop. Diligent is the key word. He can't just be sitting there wasting time. He's got to be diligent. And then I like this homage to our little thumbnail we used. Do you have any eights, officer? We were just trying to find something that was fun and entertaining. Let's see, what else do we have? We have the smoking auditor. He says no crime detainment should be illegal without proof of something. And I guess, okay, so he's saying crime detainment should be illegal without proof. Well, the proof is in the reasonable articulable suspicion. Basically, they don't have to have proof to detain you. And we could argue about whether or not Terry or Ohio versus Terry was okay. Maybe we should have a very different standard, and they should have to have proof to detain you. That's maybe a discussion for another day, is whether Terry should be overturned. It's an interesting discussion. Let's see. Let's go back and try to answer some questions. It's hard to do this as a one-man band because the comments go so fast and it's hard to keep up with it. So we have lots of comments on my connection stream, which was terrible, and I'm sorry. Let's see. Jeff Long says, can police stop you from shutting your door if they want you out of the car? It seems that some like to make you leave the door open so they can search the car easier. Yes, some lag. So maybe I'm still having lag. I don't know. Um, We've talked before about this. Pennsylvania versus Mims says that the police can order you out of the car. Basically, anytime they want, they can order you out, and you don't have to comply, I suppose. But if you don't comply, you can be forced out. Shutting your door, I don't think does you any good. The only thing it could potentially do is if there's some odor that you're trying to keep them from smelling, or if there's something maybe that's visible, in the door, in the mat pocket of the door that you don't want them to see. Maybe shutting your door keeps them from seeing that under the plain view doctrine or plain smell doctrine, essentially. I don't know that shutting your door is that important, frankly. You could certainly try. They might stop you from shutting it, and I don't know that you have any recourse if they stop you. Maybe, perhaps, let's play this out and say if you had something in your door that you were trying to conceal and they didn't see it, and you were just trying to shut your door and they stopped you from shutting your door, and then they saw what was in your mat pocket or your change pocket in your door, then perhaps you might have an argument that they did sort of an illegal search by, forcing the door to remain open when you tried to shut it. So that would be an interesting argument. There may be cases on that. I'm not sure. Um, if a cop pulls you over for a seatbelt, let's see. So Zappy Eats asks if a cop pulls you over for a seatbelt or say headlight, say he asks you out of the car, Pennsylvania versus Mims, wouldn't he possibly also be illegally extending the traffic stop? Great question. Great question. So if the officer's pulling you over for something very minor, where he doesn't really need you out of the car to say, "Here's your ticket for your headlight or your seatbelt," is asking you out of the car extending the stop itself? That's a great question. I think the courts would say no. I think the courts would say that basically he's allowed to ask you out for his safety, and therefore I don't think that's considered extending the stop. Now it depends on what he does when he's actually got you out of the car. Let's say he's got you out of the car and he starts asking all sorts of unrelated questions. Well, that could definitely be an extension of the stop. Or if if he just asks you out of the car, says, "Hey, I want to show you your headlight." I see this a lot. They'll say, "Hey, I pulled you over for your tag light being out. Come on, step out here so I can show you the light bulb." Well, I think Pennsylvania versus Mims will say that's an okay encounter and it's related to why he actually pulled you over. I don't think it's necessary to show you, but I could see that a court saying that's kind of no harm, no foul. Usually, what happens when they're asking you out is it's because they're waiting on the dog to get there, or the dog is there, and they ask you out to come sign the ticket so the dog can do its search. Let's see what else we've got. I'm looking at my notes here. Okay, yeah, I'm not seeing any complaints about the lag, so hopefully we fixed the lag. Sorry about that earlier. Let's see what else we got. And we have Big Mac Sam says, "Great channel. I should interview you on my channel. I had a cop on my channel 3 times. Keep doing what you're doing." I appreciate it, Big Mac. Reach out. My email's on my about page. I would love to chat sometime. Um, let's see. Okay, Jason Fisher has a point. You know how many cops it takes to change a light bulb? None. They all just run in and start beating it because it's black. That's not maybe not accurate. Um, we'll move on from that. How is it related? Let's see. Blood Rune says, "How is it related that the officer makes you sit and wait for the canine unit to come and investigate your vehicle? It's still pretty much up to the officer because he can just say he was doing something." That's a great question. Okay, the officer has to be diligently pursuing the stop. So he's got to be running your license, checking you for warrants, writing your ticket or your warning. And the question is, how long does that take? And if we can put the officer on the stand and cross-examine him and ask how long does it normally take? Well, in this case, if it normally takes 15 minutes to write a speeding ticket and conclude the stop, why did this case take 30 minutes? Right? And judges aren't stupid. They can see through the BS sometimes. And we could hopefully argue that, in this case, he really was in fact waiting on the dog. What I used to see a lot when we had dog cases here for marijuana, what we would see a lot was the officer would get the license and registration, he'd go to his car, he'd start writing the ticket, and lo and behold, he would magically finish with the ticket right when the canine arrived. And certainly that kind of stuff is just very suspect, right? That, well, I was due writing my ticket and I just happened to be finished right when the canine arrived. And I think judges can see through that kind of stuff. All right. Let's see. Great question from Zappy Eats. Zappy Eats, you get two for today. Most lawyers miss this point. A lot of cops will issue a warning or ticket, then ask to search your car, etc. Once you have your ticket, your effective detention is over and their mission is complete. Yes, yes, yes. I actually have a video we just filmed earlier today that's coming out next Tuesday, so be sure to subscribe. And that's one of the points in that video. Is that if you're told, like if you're given your ticket, you're given your documents back, they might not say you're free to leave, but at that point, you probably should ask, "Am I free to go?" And if you're told you're free to go, you need to go. Don't wait around. Don't do dilly dally. Just go safely. Don't peel rubber, but safely leave the encounter, because the officer can then turn around and say, "Do you mind if I search your vehicle?" There are cases on this point where basically, essentially, what happens is the officer does a traffic stop, he issues a ticket or a warning, and then once the traffic stop has concluded, he asks, "Do you mind if I search your vehicle?" That now is what we call a consensual encounter. And if you say yes, it's not a prolonged stop. The stop is concluded. You're just choosing to remain there and hang out with the officer. So if you're told you're free to leave, leave. Don't peel rubber. Be safe, but leave. All right. All right, so we have a question from Darren. You said Commonwealth. I know Virginia is a Commonwealth, but what is the difference between a state and a Commonwealth? Darren, that's a really good question, and I'm going to say right up front, there's no difference. They're all states in as far as the United States is concerned. We're all states. Virginia calls ourselves a Commonwealth, but there's no legal difference. We just call ourselves the Commonwealth. Frankly, I think Massachusetts and Pennsylvania are as well. I believe. I would suspect it harkens back to the ye olden colonial days, and maybe I'm going to show some ignorance as a lawyer and not know the real difference. But frankly, there's no difference. It's probably something in our Constitution, our state Constitution. Um, so we say Commonwealth. Like when I'm in court, I say the Commonwealth is arguing X, Y, Z because that's the technical term for the other side. Just like if you watch Law and Order, they say the state or the people. Is that's what they call the government is the state or the people. It's really just a legal technical term essentially. It just means the government. Okay. Willie Czar asks, can they detain you and insist on IDing a passenger they believe committed a crime? Willie, this is a great question, and it's actually one I'm working on a video about. Passenger rights in a vehicle are a little bit complicated, and it's a great question that I'm working on a video about. I don't want to say too much here because, frankly, I don't want to give you wrong information because I don't end up representing a lot of passengers. My clients are typically the drivers. I do mostly traffic and actual driving law like DUI and reckless driving. A lot of times, if a passenger is getting a charge, it's because, let's say, they have like an open warrant for a pending case, or the police suspect the passenger's got drugs or something like that. I don't end up handling a lot of those charges myself personally. I focus on DUI and traffic violations. So it's an issue that we're working on. Preparing a video that's pretty comprehensive, and so be sure to stay tuned for the future. All right, let's see. Great one on topic here. So let's see. Blood Rune says if the police can detain you for reasonable suspicion to get the canine out to your car, why don't they just search your car with their reasonable suspicion? Because it's a different standard to search your car. Let me have a sip of my espresso and we'll talk. Okay, so the police, okay, to search your car, there's different standards. Let's back up. There's different standards. To pull you over, the standard is really low. It's called reasonable articulable suspicion. It basically means more than a hunch. They can't just say, I think that guy might be up to no good. They got to have some things they can point to say that there's something going on here, not just a hunch. Reasonable articulable suspicion. That's the standard to pull you over. A very brief Terry stop, an investigative detention. Reasonable suspicion. To search your vehicle or to arrest you for a crime, they've got to have a higher standard. It's probable cause. It means essentially that a reasonable person would believe it's more likely than not that either, for an arrest, let's say for DUI, the standard is a more reasonable person would believe it's more likely than not that you're under the influence. To search your car, the standard is a reasonable person would believe it's more likely than not that there's whatever contraband they're looking for in your car. So marijuana, heroin, whatever it may be. So it's a different standard. They can't. So to answer Blood Rune's question, they can't detain you to bring the canine out. If they have reasonable suspicion, that's not enough to bring the canine necessarily, right? They would have to have probable like it's kind of a difficult question because the canine is only normally going to come when they don't have reason to search your car. They want the canine there to give them the probable cause to search, right? To give them that standard to meet the rule. Okay. So what they typically do is they pull you over and they find some way to keep holding you on the side of the road to wait for the canine to arrive. That's what happens in canine cases. And sometimes the canines get there very quickly. If they have a lot of canines or one nearby, it might be there in 5 or 10 minutes while the officer is legitimately still writing your speeding ticket or whatever. So that's why they can't just search your car in the first place because they got to get to that probable cause standard, that higher standard, and the canine helps them get there. So that's why they want the canine there to help meet the burden. Okay. Here's a great comment. Sir, do you know how fast your comment was going? I like that. It is hard to kind of scroll through all these comments. Someday maybe I'll have me a moderator to help me pick out some good ones. Brian Whitehead says, for any stop, they have asked me to DUI test or ask me out. Handicap permanent, but good question for temporary as well. Um, I'm not quite sure I understand Brian's question. Maybe you're asking about if you're asked out if you have a handicap. Did we actually talk about that in one of my recent videos about, I believe it was exiting the car, part 2. We talk about if you have a handicap. something where it's hard to get out of the vehicle. I would That's one of the rare times when I would talk to the police, when I would just declare your handicap. Because if they're suspecting you of being under the influence, you want them to know that if you're having trouble walking or something, it's because you've got whatever handicap it is. You got a bad knee, bad hip, whatever. You want them to know that. If you don't tell them that, that is not factored into their analysis on the side of the road. So the standard, back to probable cause, the standard is what information the officer had when he did what he did. So if he arrests you for DUI, the standard is what information he had at the time that he arrested you for DUI. And based on that information, was that a reasonable thing for him to do? And so if, let's say, you've got two hip replacements you just got 2 months ago, and you're in pain and you're having trouble walking, if you don't tell him that, he doesn't know that. He can't see that you had hip replacements. And so if you have a handicap, where it's permanent or temporary, you really should declare that so they know that that's why you're having trouble walking or standing or stumbling or whatever it may be. And especially if you're having trouble hearing, let's say you have maybe hearing impaired, because if they say, well, asked this gentleman, the same question 10 times before he'd respond to me. If you don't tell them that you have a hearing impairment, they won't know that. So I definitely would declare a handicap, if it's at all relevant. All right. Chicken X Council says, here's a question that you can maybe help me understand. Let's say we go to court for something and it looks like I would win. Cop wants to settle out of court. Is it better to win and set precedent? It's a kind of a loaded question. In general, the best thing is what the client wants. Okay. As an attorney, my job is to fight for you, the client. And so the best thing is what the client wants to do. There's been cases where I've wanted to go to trial and I thought we could frankly win and make a point, right? And it's not really precedent in trial courts, but you can make a point and maybe teach an officer a lesson sometimes. But in some of those cases, the client gets offered a reasonable agreement that is not, it's good for the client. It's maybe not the best they could get, but it's good. And the client doesn't want to take the risk and roll the dice. They take the deal and there's, everybody's happy in a way. So that's the big question, is it's really what is best for the client. As an attorney, I think it's better, for the long haul, for people to know the law. And if an officer is doing things wrong, he needs to be taught otherwise. Sometimes the best way to learn is by losing in court. And I've learned myself by losing in court, right? You never forget those lessons. So sometimes that's the best way to learn. But the most important thing is what you as the client wants. All right. Let's see. We got lots of comments coming on. Let's see. Ninja Bread Man says, can keeping a knife in a box inside a compartment that is part of your car be considered carrying a concealed weapon? Funny enough, I was just talking with somebody about the concealed weapon charges in Virginia. Every state's different. Okay, that's the biggest thing I would tell you. Concealed weapons are very tricky, whether it's a knife or a gun. If you're a gun owner or a carrier, that if you're going state to state, you got to be very careful because different states accept your concealed weapon permit, for example. Different states have different rules about how to transport it in a car. So I can't comment at all on this nationwide. I could say in Virginia, it could be considered concealed if it's in a compartment, if it's closed up where people can't see it. If it meets the definition, I'd have to double check for a knife. I think it's under a certain number of inches. For a knife, it's not considered a weapon under this statute. But if it's above a certain number of inches, I want to say it's 3 inches, 3.5 inches for the blade. What's interesting is a gun in Virginia, there's a specific written black and white exception for guns. So I could have a firearm in my glove box that is locked, and that is not considered carrying a concealed weapon. But if I put a Bowie knife in there, if it fit, that would be considered carrying a concealed weapon. Now, go figure how that makes sense, right? The law is crazy. So if you have any kind of weapons, you definitely need to be sure you're very careful about what the law is in your state and wherever you may be traveling with it. All right. Whitehammer asks, what if a person has a headlight out but is using their fog lights? Would that justify a legal stop? One of those questions that really depends upon the state you're in. In Virginia, as of, I guess it was about 2 years ago when they changed this, the answer was yes, that would have been a good stop. If you had one headlight out, even if you got your fog marker lights on, if it's nighttime, of course. But now in Virginia, just having one headlight bulb out is not enough to pull you over. The law changed, I believe it was maybe last summer in 2021. The law changed, and basically they would have to prove that you had no headlights to pull you over. It's kind of crazy, but that's kind of the law. So again, it depends on the state you're in. All right. Xfail says, how can the police claim removing you from your vehicles for their safety? Exiting a vehicle on a roadway puts you at extreme risk. I agree. I think that claim is kind of bunk in general, and I talk about that in my exiting the vehicle videos. That they could ask Mother Teresa out of the car, for example. It's really kind of crazy. To me, I think if the police can articulate why they thought this particular situation, this particular driver was dangerous, why there was a risk to them, that might be different. I think that's probably what the standard should be, but that's not what the standard is under Pennsylvania versus Mims. All right, that's the end of the coffee. We'll see how much longer we can go here. I'm not sure what to make of this comment. You remind me of Pee Wee Herman, but way cooler. I guess I appreciate that I'm way cooler than Pee Wee Herman. Thank you. All right. Here's a great response about the Commonwealth. Commonwealth comes from British rule, a political community founded for the common good. Therefore, in the U.S., Kentucky, Virginia, Mass, and Pennsylvania. It's basically interchangeable with state. So I got three of them. That's not bad to get three off the top of my head. It's interesting that they're all kind of close together, right? But that makes sense because the Western states were formed much later, and they don't, weren't colonies and didn't have that colonial influence as much. All right, let's see. James Epp asks, following on Zappy's question, what if I don't trust the officers present at the scene and I want to wait for them to leave first? Thoughts on free to go, free to stay? It's an interesting question. I guess what James is asking is back to the issue of, if you're told you're free to go, should you just leave immediately or should you wait and let the officers clear the scene instead of maybe following you away, for example? I would leave the scene. That's personally what I would do. I don't see any reason to not do that. Um, I suppose if you leave the scene and they start following you, you could find a safe place to pull over and park your car and roll your windows up and lock them and wait for them to move on. Maybe that's a good solution. But I would still leave the scene even if you don't think they're trustworthy. Rhode Island is a plantation. Actually, I think then they legally changed their name. I think they removed that from the name. It used to be Rhode Island and Providence Plantations, but I think they might have changed that. All right. So we have Evan Burt says, how best to assert these rights on the side of the road? An illegal search might be thrown out later, but by then the damage is done and there's no recourse. Um, it's tricky. I talk about in other videos that I do not recommend arguing with an officer on the side of the road. It's not going to get you anywhere usually. Usually, an officer is going to dig in, they're going to get mad, you're going to get mad, and frankly, it's just going to look bad in court when there's video of you arguing with an officer. It's much better to simply not consent, to assert your right to remain silent, and stay silent. If the officer conducts an illegal search and they find contraband, they charge you with some kind of criminal offense, then you fight about that in court or have your attorney do that. And if it's illegal, then the contraband will be suppressed and you'll win. I mean, that's the only way to do this, really. Certainly, what happens sometimes is officers conduct illegal searches. They find nothing, and so no charges are filed. And so you end up with just a speeding ticket and a car that's been kind of roughed up by the police. There's not much recourse for that. You might talk to a civil rights attorney, but really you're going to have probably damages, some actual monetary or physical damages in order to justify some kind of lawsuit. So it's kind of a mess, but I don't suggest arguing on the side of the road. All right, just a bill '02 says, just a bill sitting on Capitol Hill, I guess. If the officer finishes the ticket when the dog arrives, can you drive away? Doesn't the officer need to still be working on the ticket when the sniff concludes? That's a really great question. We're getting into a little kind of the weeds there. All those little details do matter, right? I mean, if the officer gives you your ticket and he's released you. You've in Virginia, you used to have to sign the summons. You don't have to anymore, but they still ask you to sign it. He's giving you your license back. Yeah, I would say you could drive away even if the dog is still there, sniffing around your car. The problem there is you don't want to be accused of trying to run over the canine. I mean, if there's anything people love more than law enforcement officers in some areas, it's canine officers, right? So I would say be careful if you're trying to leave while there's a canine out sniffing because you don't want to be accused of trying to kill a canine, right? I mean that'd be a serious problem. So the details do matter, and the sequence does matter a whole lot. Usually, what I see happen when I used to see these a lot is the officer would conclude writing his ticket, And then he would exit his cruiser. The canine would be right there at the back of the bumper, essentially, of the person, of the defendant's car. The officer would go up to the window and say, "Hey, I've got your ticket ready. Come step out here so you can sign it." And he would go over to the hood of his cruiser with the defendant, explain the ticket. "Okay, see, you got court on such and such day. I just need you to sign here. There's not an admission of guilt, et cetera, et cetera." And while he's doing that, it takes a minute or two to explain and have him sign it and say, "Oh, do you have any questions?" And that's just all normal. While he's doing that, the canine does his sniff, and frankly, the canine sniff doesn't take very long at all to do a quick open air sniff and get an alert, and now they've got a reason to detain you. So that's typically what I saw when I saw a lot of these. Since marijuana became essentially legal in Virginia for most basic purposes, um, I just don't see these very often because that was kind of the main drug offense that I handled because it was the main thing people drove around in their cars with. Let's see. Darren is kind of a pessimist like me in a lot of ways. I think there is no situation that the presence of the police can't make worse. In general, I can tend to agree with that. I will say, in my practice, I know a lot of police officers, and there are a good number of police officers that if there was somebody shooting at me, I would not hesitate to get behind them and hit the deck. Okay, I mean, so I will say in some instances, police can be a very good thing. In a lot of instances that I deal with, I don't think so, but there are some times I would be happy to get behind them and hit the deck and let them do their job. Let's see. Andy Riz says, Andrew, some time ago, a police officer was arrested for planting evidence on a lot of people that ended up in jail. Is there a way to protect yourself from an unlawful search and evidence plant? This happens, evidence can be falsified, planted, whatever. There was a case in DC, or a bunch of cases, and I believe it was in District of Columbia, where the breathalyzers were calibrated wrong and lots of people were over the limit when they weren't really. The best way to protect yourself, I think, is to just simply assert your rights, like I mean, advocate on this channel. I think recording things is a good idea. If, like I mentioned, if you're pulled over on the side of the road, to record the interaction, but I wouldn't have a camera in the officer's face. Officer, I'm recording you, just so you know. Like I wouldn't do that. I would at most tap the video button on your phone and just lay it in sit in your console, lay it in your seat, and you've at least got an audio recording of what happened. Stuff like that. There's no way to protect yourself from everything, frankly, and there's a point where we could be a little too paranoid, in my opinion. Uh, Osgood Black asks, "Can I cross-examine the canine?" That's a great question. Unfortunately, you can't. What you can do is you can ask for the canine's training records and their performance records, things like that. And you can certainly cross-examine the handler on the training that he's had to manage the dog, and things like that. So there are ways to sort of question the accuracy and sort of the integrity, in a way, of the canine to see if this dog is actually detecting what we believe he's detecting. It gets kind of technical, but it's definitely something you could cross-examine the officer on all that information, and of course cross-examine the records of the canine. And on that note, it would be interesting. I wonder, probably some people have done it where you could actually, maybe do a test of the canine. That would be an interesting question to set up some sort of blind test to see if the canine's actually accurate. All right. So we got some other good questions. So PBS says, "What should I do when a policeman runs my license and it shows I have had a DUI?" And he comes back and says, "I think you have been drinking," and asks me to step out. This is a great question. I see this a lot. We just was watching a DUI video for a client the other day, and it seemed one of those cases where clearly the officer knew that the client had a past DUI, and so he's got his hackles raised and he's investigating, is this person drunk now? Um, as far as the asking you to step out, I've got a couple videos on my channel. Please subscribe and check out those videos in the past couple weeks about stepping out. If you're asked to step out, refuse. If you're ordered to step out, you need to do it. But the officer will then likely say, "I wanted to have you do some quick tests to make sure you're okay to drive." Say, "No, thank you. I invoke the fifth." And then be silent. I cannot stress enough. "No, thank you. I invoke the fifth." Be silent. That's it. That's all you say. He's going to still ask you, "Why? Why? Don't you want to do some tests?" "I just want to make sure you're okay to drive." He's going to badger you and badger you and badger you. And he's allowed to do that for a little bit. But don't do the tests, right? If he asks you to do a handheld breath test, I've got a video on this. There's about 5 states where you have to do it on the side of the road, or else you can get in more trouble. Most states you can refuse the handheld test on the side of the road. The only time I personally would do one is if I knew I was in a state where I needed to, or I'd be in trouble. or if I knew that I'd had nothing to drink that day. If I'd had probably even one beer with dinner, I probably would not do the handheld breath test. I would probably myself would probably rather get arrested and go to the police station and blow really low into the breath machine and be acquitted at trial if I had to be. Hopefully it wouldn't come to that, but that's kind of my personal rule of thumb. The best rule of thumb, of course, is to not drink ever if you're driving, and especially if you've had one DUI. I don't want to lecture people, but I will say that I represent a lot of people with DUIs, and I understand 100% getting a first DUI. It's not an excuse, but it can happen, especially the 08s and things like that. People make mistakes. But when people get a second DUI, it's just because you're frankly not making good life choices for sure at that point. So make good choices in life. All right. Let's see. Flushy has some great facts for us again. Rhode Island used to have the longest state name. They shortened it in 2020. So I was right. They did change it. See, look at that. All right. Jason Fisher says, never, 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 ever talk to the cops. They are not there to help you. They are there to make revenue for their incorporated townships. I agree. Don't talk to the police. That's a great point. And in general, the revenue does go to localities. In Virginia, I don't know about every state, but in Virginia, the state police, their ticket revenue goes to the literary fund. So it goes to education, essentially, is what it's supposed to go to. Now, if we believe that, I don't know. Let's see. All right. We're going to try to wrap it up. So I'm trying to see if there's any good kind of final questions. Let's go to kind of the recent comments. This is a good question. Trouts Bane says, can an officer separate a service dog from their handler without probable cause? Really great question, and honestly, I don't know the answer to that. If anybody knows, that would be an interesting thing to pop on in a comment. If there's a case on this, I've never had that issue. I've had a few clients with service dogs. That's really interesting. I would argue, if you were doing, let's say, a DUI investigation, and you've got a person with a service dog, certainly we would argue as a defense that not doing well on the test is because, at least in part, you were separated from your service dog. Now it depends on what kind of service animal it is, and what your personal issues are, why you need it. But it definitely is a good issue to argue about. Let's see. That's kind of about it. Here's another good question. Saul Miller Smith says, do police reports need reason for probable cause for an arrest? The police report is not the controlling document in a case. People always think the police report's the be all end all. It's really just the police notes, right? It's just his notes about what happened, or her notes about what happened. Generally speaking, everything that happens is going to be in there because they do a lot of cases, and your case may not be on trial for 4, 5, 6 months. Who knows? Then it may get appealed and have to go on for many more months. So the police report usually contains a lot of stuff, and it's usually kind of the playbook for the case. But it's not legally required to have stuff in there. Basically, at court, on the stand, in evidence, the state or the Commonwealth has to put forward the proper evidence to maintain the charge. And if the officer says, well, in my report, I wrote this, but I also recall XYZ happened. Well, if the judge believes that, then that would be enough. So the report's not the Bible for the case. It's just sort of the playbook. It's got most of everything, but it doesn't have to have every little piece of evidence in there. And let's see. This is a good question, and something James Shedman asked: does Border Patrol fall under the same laws or rules? It's a great question. Honestly, living in Virginia, I don't know. We deal with Border Patrol around here, but the more I'm getting into this area of interest and looking at other YouTube channels, for example, there's lots of Border Patrol interaction videos and sort of audits and things like that. And so it's something I want to look into, to be honest, about kind of how Border Patrol and our rights fall into those issues. So it's something I'm frankly not that much aware of living in Virginia, but it's something that I want to look more into. I will say I grew up in North Texas, and so it's a similar issue, right? Texas has a lot of border and a lot of Border Patrol issues, but I lived in North Texas, and North Texas is 12 hours from the border of Mexico, so it's not something that we have much experience in anywhere I've lived. But I understand that a lot of people obviously live on borders and probably have issues where you cross borders frequently and have to deal with Border Patrol inspections and questioning and whatnot. So it's definitely an interesting issue, probably for a lot of you, that I plan to look into more in the future. All right. And I think, yes, we have confirmation. The name did change November 2020. So that's what another commenter told us. All right. I think we're going to probably call it a day here. I appreciate everybody coming by. Please be sure to subscribe. And I'm trying to do, we're going to try to do a video every Tuesday still. And we may lessen up that and do a video maybe every other Tuesday. We'll see if I can keep it up with my court schedule. And I'm going to try to keep doing a live once a month. So please be sure to subscribe so you stay in tune with everything we're doing here on the channel. Tell a friend. It really helps to spread the word. And I'm trying to help you guys out. And we appreciate people stopping by. And we're going to end with Sony Los Pichios. I don't answer questions. I plead the fifth, and I want an attorney. That's pretty good advice. Actually, no. Here we got a better one to end with. Nice bow tie. People, I get some flack for the bow ties, but I like bow ties. They're very practical and they don't get in your way. Hope everybody has a great day. Thanks for stopping by, and please do subscribe and tell a friend. Take care.